Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Some people are still coming in, but I just wanted, while you're joining, to take the opportunity to hope that you're not roasting wherever you are. We've all got our fans going. I'm wondering what that will do to our noise cancelling. And I wanted to point out that Lizzie has made her nod to the financial world by wearing her pinstripe. And Emma made her nod to how serious this all is by taking her Scotland flag down and asking her son not to play his bagpipes this evening.
Which was for real, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I told him to be quiet, he started playing his bagpipes.
So yes, that's our preparation drama so far. Let's hope that everything goes smoothly from here on in, but I'm sure we'll manage no matter what turns up. I have put a slide up for you to see while you're entering so that you can see who we are. And I just wanted to take a moment to point out our credentials. I'm 30 years in financial planning, and I specialise in helping women, empowering women to live their best financial lives. And one of the things that sometimes I end up doing is helping women transition because they've had quite a major event. Sometimes it's a bereavement, sometimes a divorce, sometimes redundancy. So I was very keen to learn from these two special ladies how we might help people around the behaviour and the psychology in those situations. So Lizzie is a grief educator and author. She specialises in helping people gain a deeper understanding of grief so as they can make these transitions. And Dr Emma, also known as the psychology mum. Is that right?
Yeah, for when I illustrate, yeah, that's what I call myself from illustrations. Yeah.
She's an author and illustrator and a practicing clinical psychologist. So we're very lucky to have you both here because my expertise has got nothing to do with yours while we're looking at what happens around the finances, because Women's Wealth is hosting the event. I think the bit that I'm most interested in is the bit that's not about the money, really. It's about our feelings, our thinking, our behaviour when money arrives at a difficult time. I wanted to make it very, very clear to everybody that there's no pressure here tonight to make decisions, to share if you don't want to. You are very welcome to just sit and listen quietly and grab the guide and serve yourself with whatever will help you if you're going through a difficult time at the moment. We're not just focusing on grief, but I think grief is the one that can be the kind of toughest because it has everlasting consequences. And when you're going through things like redundancy and divorce, I have known women have parties as a result of those events, and rarely under grieving circumstances. So I think there's a kind of difference between the impact of them, but all of them impact us, whether we like it or not, and whether it's good or bad. So I think learning about how we react as human beings in those circumstances is an important tool for us in understanding. The emotional numbness that sometimes comes along with one of these events, the pressure that you need to do the right thing, either kind of like caught in the headlights or rushing to get things sorted out, all of these things, they do not mean that you're bad with money. They mean you're a human being going through an emotional experience and being asked to deal with financial issues when your bandwidth has been severely curtailed. So we're going to have a little chat to the experts about why and how that happens. I'm going to take the screen down now. You'll find out more about Lizzie and Dr Emma as we talk to them, and you can find out a little bit more about them on their own social media and in our guide, which we'll give you at the end of the session. So I'm going to stop sharing that now, and I'm going to go to our first question so that we can kind of push on and start getting into some of the details here of what happens. So when someone receives a lump sum through one of these life events, what is really going on for them, both emotionally and psychologically? And I'm going to ask you first to deal with the kind of like psychological piece for us.
Absolutely. So we're talking about a number of different events here, but we have kind of what we call the scale of events, stressors. And most of these events lie quite high on the scale of event stressors. So they are also stressful events. And obviously different, people will have different experiences to different events depending on what those are. However, they are all stressors to some extent. And that means you will be experiencing some level of stress. There's also lots of things to go on as well, and there'll be lots of different emotions, possibly some positive, like you said, in response to some experiences, but also most likely a lot of difficult emotions. So you're expected to make a lot of decisions at a point where you're experiencing high stress, which isn't really compatible with good decision making at times, particularly if you're feeling overwhelmed. Feeling overwhelmed can actually make decision making one of the really difficult things for you. You've also got lots of complex emotions going on. It might be mixed emotions. There also might be lots of things to prioritize, which can make it really difficult knowing where to start. And look at this whole, a glut of things you have to do, and that can start to feel overwhelming in itself. So like you said, some people do rush in, but other people might feel they just want to avoid this really difficult thing as well and kind of back off from it, because we naturally back off from things that feel difficult. And sometimes that's okay, but if it's something that has a deadline or needs to happen, then that can be really difficult for us and it become problematic. So it's having to make decisions at a time when there is either high stress, high levels of overwhelm, or lots of difficult emotions. And I would add as well, sometimes we're also having to learn new things. Often we haven't done these things before, and we're having to learn new things at a time when, again, we're overwhelmed, and that can be really difficult. So all that together can make it a really difficult time to make these decisions because of everything else going on in our lives.
Thank you for that. And Lizzie, what would you say are the most obvious things that happen to us as human beings?
Well, I mean, one thing I'd love to talk a little bit about in relation to what Emma just said is brain fog, which is the result of overwhelm. And, I think particularly where grief over a bereavement is concerned, it's a very big deal, brain fog. And it's not just in the first few weeks. A lot of my clients, I see people for one-to-one grief guidance, and I have people who are 2 or 3 years on from their major bereavement, perhaps their partner dying or a child dying or a sibling dying, and they are still suffering from brain fog, not all the time, but it can hit them because there are triggers in all of these situations, aren't there? And, if I talk about bereavement for now, triggers could be a birthday coming up. It could be of their loved one or even their own birthday, but there's the absence of the person that should be there with them. And so this absence can cause major triggers, and the brain is simply so overwhelmed that it literally cuts out. And that's what brain fog is. It's that overwhelm where you're trying to compute. I'm a huge fan of the work of Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote this book, The Grieving Brain. She's a neuroscientist and psychologist at the University of Arizona. And she has proven scientifically that as human beings, we can't compute death. We simply can't compute it at first, which is why we spend many weeks and months wondering if it really has actually happened, and that sort of denial. And so really, if we think of that and we take that seriously and we think of those triggers, those seasons of grief as the year progresses, and there are these triggers, and we're dealing with money coming in, and that money might have a negative connotation anyway if it's insurance money as a result of a death and probate money. That's where I think people can make some dodgy decisions through no fault of their own.
Yeah. So we've looked at the kind of shock and disbelief of it, that the brain can't really map it. We've talked about the brain fog, the fear of getting it wrong, some guilt, especially around inheritance and things like that. What about pressure from others and from ourselves? Is that something that you've seen in circumstances where you're working with people? It is for me as well, like the pressure to get it right, the pressure to do it now. And again, especially if there are kind of financial squeezes, or the kind of seductive idea that there might be something in the pipeline coming somebody's way, and they're not as impacted maybe by the bereavement, they're more interested in the inheritance, and so this pressure starts to pile on that something has to be done. How does that manifest, Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing. You are more likely to be vulnerable at that point and have, like you said, difficulty making decisions and thinking clearly. At the same time, there's maybe for some people, not for everybody, but there may be for some people lots of different opinions and maybe pressure from some people to make particular decisions. And it can be difficult to if you're even uncertain yourself, not to be able to filter out which one is the ones you should follow, the correct advice. And also, it is a vulnerable time, and you might be, worried about other people. So that might play into your decision making as well, because you're worried about other people and they're telling you something that you should do. So there's so many pressures coming from different people. First, again, for some people, it's all very different experiences. And I think that, alongside the fact that decision making can be more difficult, you've got this massive life change of some description. With grief, obviously, it's something, often a shock that you've not been expecting, you haven't planned for, and that can be really difficult to manage, the two of those. And it's really important, to think about, in the middle of it, not just what other people want, but what the right decision is for you.
I think something that I've noticed is that when you're going through one of these transitions, your identity, especially if it's your job that's changing or your marital status, but even in the grief situation where your identity is changing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You are becoming maybe from married to widow or from married to divorcee. You're, I used to be a graphic designer, I'm not now. What am I if I'm not that? Especially if you've put quite a lot of effort into your job. So this identity shift, which takes time for anybody, doesn't it, to get used to. So trying to make the decisions sometimes when you actually don't know what your own future yet looks like is really tough, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think as well, when you talk about identity shift, an identity shift can come with a loss as well, a loss of, your roles, obviously, but also a loss of confidence, because obviously often we tie that identity into, feeling competent, feeling worthwhile, like you said. So when then we lose that, that could be difficult. But I think another critical thing is often our identity shifts because we had this support or social support with grief, and that somebody when we knock ideas off, we trusted, or so it can shift kind of where we are in the roles. So we might need to take a role of doing things we've never done before. Perhaps somebody else managed the finances, and suddenly you're having to do this thing that wasn't part of your identity, alongside all that complexity of identity shift and loss of confidence potentially for some people as well.
Lizzie, is it something you experience?
Yes, I think, in relation to what you're both saying, I think something I feel really strongly about is the perception of other people in any of these situations. I think there's such a lack of understanding of how long it takes to adapt to living with grief, whether it's a divorce, a diagnosis, workplace change, or a death. And it takes many weeks, months, and years for our brains to adapt to this. And yet, socially, particularly here in the UK, I think there's a notion that, maybe somebody's gone back to work, they're doing really well, because work actually offers purpose, community of colleagues, it's a structure. And so a lot of people want to go back to work. And so in the workplace, they'll seem to be doing well. And there's a tendency for people to think, oh, they're okay now. And a year's gone by, but they have no idea. I sit on the other side of it, listening to people who might be a couple of years down the line, but they're really struggling. They're really struggling because they're actually masking in public. They're masking to their friends. They're masking at work. And masking isn't such a bad thing sometimes, because we actually have to do it to be able to function in grief. But as long as we can grieve fully as well, we need to grieve fully and live fully, but they're in parallel. And that's the difficult thing to manage. And I think it's that perception of other people. So in relation to the money and dealing with finances, particularly, as you both said, if somebody hasn't done it before and it was their partner, for instance, who operated the money before. And I'm not gendering that, because I have clients of either gender. Sometimes it's the women who have controlled all the money, and other times it's the men. It's not gendered, I don't think. But it's just that, yes, it's an entirely new landscape, and this perception of other people, of them doing okay, is a challenge. And then they can feel it's a challenge to say, actually, I'm really struggling, and money particularly is somewhere I'm struggling. And a lot of my clients find that, that they're really scared to say, actually, I could do with some professional help, or because they feel like they're going to look a bit stupid. But if it really wasn't their role before, they might have had a mega high-powered job, but just not been the one that did the finances. And so that, on top of perhaps looking after children as a widow or a widower, I see a lot of men who are suffering this problem too. It's a real challenge at a very difficult time. But I would love it if people didn't feel the shame of putting their hand up and saying, actually, I need expert help, or even in their friendship group. Who do you know who's good at money and finance, and who do you trust? Can they just come in and have a look for you?
Yeah. I do tend to say to ladies who I meet, because I specialise in working with women, and they turn up and they say, I feel like I missed the lesson on this. I feel really underinformed. And this is without a grief problem. This is just money in general. And I do say to them, do you know how to fell a tree? And they say, no, I don't. And I say, well, what would happen if you needed to fell a tree? Are you going to learn to use a chainsaw, get the safety harness on and scale the tree? Or are you going to phone somebody who knows how to do this? Because we weren't taught, were we, to manage money at school? We're expected to just suddenly know how to do it. And then in parallel with a massive change in our lives, we're trying to learn these new skills, gain confidence we never really had because we were never taught around this subject. And it all just becomes too much.
Yeah. And what you made me think about there, both of you, is shame, and how shame can lead us to concealing things. And I think there's huge shame about, feeling bad and suffering. That's really common in my field, is to feel shame about mental health and feeling bad. Although all of us will at some point. But there's also an extra shame about money. And certainly we often feel shameful about not being able to manage money. But it is a skill, like you say. It's a skill like anything else. And that shame leads to us hiding it, hiding it off, or avoiding it possibly, or hiding it from other people and not asking for help, which is so sad, because actually opening up and speaking about and asking for help with emotions, suffering and money is really critical to help get the steps to build through. And the other thing I thought of as well is we often internalize it to mean something about us, but it's just a skill. It's learn to deal with money, or learn to deal with how you respond to feeling bad. That's not an internal thing that's wrong with you. It's just something that needs to be done or learned.
Yeah. And it's so important, isn't it, to try and help people understand that those feelings, as real as they are, as debilitating as they are, they actually don't belong they don't belong to you. That blanket of shame doesn't belong to you. This is just something you haven't learned yet. So skill up, get some help. Don't even take it on if you don't want to. I have no intention of ever learning to fell a tree. It's never going to happen.
I'd love to now you have said it.
We'll see you next time with your chainsaw. It's not in my camp. I'm not learning that. Whereas most people do find that they do need to skill up to a certain extent around money, because it has such long tentacles into every part of our life. But if we don't have some empowerment around it.
Absolutely. And that's not something you're doing wrong. It's just something, it is a skill to learn. It's not some fundamental flaw in you, which I think is really critical, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your help in answering those questions. So I just wanted to move on now to the next question. Lizzie, I want to start with you. Why do we either rush into a decision or avoid it completely? What's going on there?
Well, I think it goes back to the overwhelm, and it goes back to every part of your life has changed, whether you're going through a divorce. I mean, actually, when people come to me for grief over a divorce or a relationship or workplace change, but let's say particularly divorce, I treat them exactly the same, because it is a major bereavement. It doesn't matter who made the decision, whether it's amicable or whether it isn't. It is still a major bereavement, a major loss. It's the loss of landscape, the loss of family dynamic, the loss of friendship dynamics very often, even if there's no one to blame and people have just fallen out of love with each other, people take sides, and there's a panic, and all of this can result in this panic of needing to act fast, of going through all the solicitors, going to the court, then acting on the money that comes in. And I think this panic just rises in people from the minute this whole process starts, or whether it's probate and they've been waiting for the probate to come because it can take so long. And you might be getting to your first year of grief, your first anniversary of grief when the probate comes in. Or even with divorce, it can take a long process, a long time, can't it? So people are exhausted and overwhelmed by the time this money comes in any of those situations. And it's got a negative connotation. And you've got the misunderstanding of people saying, well, why, you were the one that wanted to divorce, so why are you so stressed about it? A lack of empathy, a lack of sympathy from the people around. Everything around you has changed. And then you've got to make these decisions. And so no wonder people rush at it in that panic when the adrenaline's high, or they're exhausted and they're suffering from brain fog, and bad decisions are made. And actually, I know from you, Sam, that there are certain things that have to happen in all those situations, but there are quite a few things that can simply wait until the dust has settled.
Yeah. And I do think that that's such an important point, isn't it? That we need to give ourselves permission to sort the pile out into the things that have to be done and the things that don't have to be done, no matter who tells you differently. What is the to-do list? Where are there deadlines which will cost you money or opportunity, or fines if you miss them? And where is it just somebody else's opinion that you should have done this by now? Because that's not a deadline, that's an opinion. And getting someone to help you sort those out so that you can do the things you need to do, get yourself in a position of stability and safety, and then check in with yourself, work out your own identity, your own needs. It's you, Lizzie, who says curate your future, isn't it?
I love that word, curate your life as you want it to be now, and have agency over it.
Yeah, which is, I think you need to give yourself permission, don't you, to stabilize so as you get to that space and take as long as you need in it. So Emma, you've got something to say around this, I'm sure, about how our brains and our psychology is working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have lots of ideas as Lizzie was speaking there. And I guess for me, it comes back to overwhelm. When we are overwhelmed, and Lizzie was describing lots of things that could potentially overwhelm us, our brain does find it much harder to know where to start a task or problem solve a task, or even work out what the tasks are. So it's really difficult. And sometimes people will just say, I need to do something, and they'll do something because they can see it, but it's maybe not the thing they need to do at that point in time. Or overwhelm makes us avoid as well. So it's like, I'm too overwhelmed, I'm just going to step back from it. And then we might miss things that we do actually need to do because they do need to be prioritized. So I liked what you said about categorizing, because I often, speak to a lot of people overwhelmed, and I talk about, let's just work out the things that are overwhelming you. Let's just work out what they are and then categorize them. Now, obviously, I work that out for more kind of related to mental health, but the same applies for money. Which ones are the priorities? Which ones do we need to do now? Which ones can wait? And even just having that structure can really help think, okay, here's what I need to target now. And this is, it might just be one or two things rather than everything. And here's things that can wait. And I think just structuring it, and often when people are overwhelmed, they do need another brain or somebody else to help them do that and look at it, and somebody who has the knowledge, because I don't have the knowledge around money. I couldn't sit down and say, this is what needs to be prioritized around that. I could say that around mental health, or if we're doing something, around specific topics I'm an expert in. But, we often do need somebody with the skills to help us know how to categorize, how to prioritize, which things are actually important and which things can we just say, okay, I can think about that. And that might not be the same things that the people around about us are telling us are important. It's actually getting the facts around it, what is important, how can we categorize it so it feels more manageable, so we can know which one we do need to do first and which ones we can let wait.
I think there's pesky life admin. Always, isn't there? It's just the pesky life admin when you're grieving.
Sadmin.
Sadmin. Yes, I remember us reading you saying this. Yeah, Sadmin. It comes with its own set of life admin right when you really don't need it. So having somebody who knows, because the thing you said earlier about this isn't something we've done before often. These, if we're lucky, these are events that really don't happen to us very often. So we've not practiced. We don't have a skill set that we've rolled a game plan that we rolled out before. So like getting somebody on side who does know what order it needs to be done in, it can make a really difficult task simple overnight. And I really am a big fan in these specialist situations of delegation to experts. But do choose your experts carefully, because there's we're vulnerable at this time, and we need people who know how to handle the situation and have our best interests at heart. And those things can be verified, and you should have somebody help you make those verification checks so that you've got the right people on your side. But as soon as you have actually big things with lots of tentacles to them shrivel up into a tiny little thing that can be put over there and left to somebody else to deal with. And I think that's a magical experience when I see it happen for some of our clients. So you seem to want to say something there, Lizzie, about Sadmin.
Yes, well, Sam, it was more that I'm so happy we can have this conversation in front of everybody, because I think what we're doing is normalizing this. And the number of clients I have who are saying to me, I think there's something wrong with me. I'm not coping well. I can't do the money thing. I'm avoiding emails. I'm delaying things. And I hear it from different people on different days every week. And my clients are all over the world thanks to Zoom, but they're still multi-cultures, multi-ethnicities, multi-faiths, very different people. They're all saying the same thing. They're saying exactly what we're all saying about the delaying things and the avoidance and all these things, and then thinking there's something wrong with them. And I'm so glad we can normalize this for everybody who's listening tonight and say it's not just you. I'm sure behind the screens there are people nodding and recognizing themselves, but there's nothing wrong with you. And I love your tree felling analogy, because it's such a good one. It's so illustrative. Isn't it?
And I do think that instead of imagining that we're doing nothing in these periods, we're actively stabilizing the situation, by not rushing at decisions, by not being worried about what other people think to the extent that we make a decision that isn't in our interest because it suits somebody else. And we're going to have to live with the consequences of that decision forever. But we did it to please somebody else. These things, we need permission not to be doing that, to just find our stable, safe place where we're dealing with our Sadmin, but we're not making life-changing or unalterable decisions until we feel ready, until we've done that curating our future. We've learnt what our new identity is starting to look like, and we've started to grow into it. And then we're in a better place, aren't we, to think forward. I don't find that financial planning for people who are in the early stages of losing a job or a partner or are in grief, you can't, they don't want to plan 2 years out. They're barely getting through today. So it's that stabilising, isn't it? And it's not avoiding, it is stabilising. It is actively doing something to give yourself the time, space and security to get to the place where you make better decisions, and they'll come easier.
I think you brought up such a good point there, Sam, about not wanting to plan for the future, because again, so many of my clients will say to me they don't feel steady in the world. They can't look ahead to even tomorrow, let alone 6 months' time. And that is one of the first responses of grief is when you've had somebody leave your world, whether through divorce or whether through a death, but they're not in your orbit anymore. It's hard to trust the world, even if they've died from cancer or a heart attack, and it's nobody's fault. But it can make you feel very discombobulated. It can make you feel untethered in the world. And therefore, your trust in what's going to happen tomorrow isn't there for a while. And I'm sure, the work Emma and I both do is about helping to tether people again, I think. And Sam, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you find, something I see quite a lot is that particularly where widows are concerned, I find they want to, a lump sum of money might come and they want to give it to their children. They want to immediately, because they don't really want it, because it's got this negative connotation of a death, for instance. And so they give it to their children, but then actually they're not looking after themselves for their old age or their future.
They might not be doing their children a favour either. So yes. I think that normally when parents are gifting to children, they do it in a very measured way that doesn't change the raison d'etre of the recipient, doesn't give them too much to do themselves damage, doesn't rob them of benefits that they're entitled to or student loans that they could otherwise use. They're very considered and careful about how much and when they gift. Whereas in this set of circumstances, as you say, it can be, I don't want it, you have it situation. And that might not be good for them. They might need it. When you recalculate what what your circumstances are going to look like, you might need, if you haven't got somebody to send out in the garden and fell the tree, you might have to hire someone. Life might look a bit more expensive when you do the sums, but independent living. So have you done that yet? And if you haven't, wait until you have. It's like, it's okay. There is one exception around that. There's something called a deed of variation to a will, which can only be used in a 2-year period after death and before the estate has been distributed. So sometimes, like, I see that happening, and even 2 years, like even within 2 years, can feel a bit urgent. But there are some deadlines around this stuff where a good financial planner is going to help you know what those deadlines are and recognize if you're about to lose an opportunity, bring it to the table and see whether you're ready to think about it. There's some 2-year, there's some 1-year ones, some 2-year ones. The inland revenue, if you use the kind of inform us once service, tell us once service, HMRC find out about the death normally because somebody cancelled the council tax or something like that, and within 3 months and 7 days they will want a tax return. And that's where that Sadmin starts knocking on the door, and you think, a tax return, really? Like I want to be thinking about that. So but knowing that's going to happen takes all the sting out of it. And it just becomes a bit of routine paperwork. So I think it's important really just to talk to somebody who knows what's coming down the pipe towards you and can help you navigate it. I think that's a really important point around that. I wanted to, because I'm conscious I want to leave time for people to ask questions. And one of the important things that I wanted you to tell us is, like, what are the sensible next steps that we can take when we find ourselves in this situation, which we've already said is likely to be overwhelming, sad, painful. There's likely to be all sorts of emotions triggering off of all sorts of events every day of our lives, and we're struggling to see beyond the day, the week, the month, and people are asking us to think longer term. What can we do? What are sensible steps we can take to protect ourselves emotionally and psychologically in this space?
Emma, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, there are many things we can do. I think the first thing, which we have alluded to, is stop beating yourself up and thinking there's something wrong with you. We all do that, and that's something I'm sure you see, Lizzie. I see all the time in my clinic room. So somebody will come through the door and tell me they've experienced this, a grief or this, and they're feeling bad about it, and they'll say, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or what's wrong with me? And it's, you know, it's the natural occurrence from what they've experienced, but yet they're beating themselves up about it and making themselves feel bad. They're shaming themselves for not being able to deal with it or not coping. And I think that, you know, a difficult situation is difficult. Now we can add another layer of difficulty by shaming ourselves and thinking we should be coping with this, thinking that it's just us that feels this way, whereas grief, divorce is universally incredibly difficult and stressful, no matter what's led to it. And so taking that layer of additional shame and beating ourselves up about how we're feeling off it and allowing ourselves to feel like that. And if we can, this is really difficult for many people, it is seeking support if you need it. Now, we are very much indoctrined, I believe, to see seeking help as a bad thing. And I want to shift that and say seeking help is often the most positive thing you can do, whether that's, you know, grief support, psychological support, and that might just be one session saying this is absolutely normal. Here's some, you know, pointers back in the direction, monetary support, practical support. You might need practical support with things in the house, and that might be from family members, professionals. But I want to, you know, I really want to take away the shame of seeking help and seeking help is really, it's not a weakness, it's a real strength to be able to say, I need support with this. And we, as humans, we all need support. So that's the two kind of main themes that come through my work, is beating yourself up and making it harder because it's already hard. It doesn't need to be harder. And seeing support seeking as a real strength that can benefit you.
Thank you. And Lizzie, what would you say are the things we should be doing to help ourselves in this situation?
Well, first one, I think, is seeking support. As Emma said, I totally agree. And gaining a toolkit, I think adding to a toolkit. And I mean, I went through major bereavement 25 years ago when my eldest son died. And I have not stopped processing my grief. I process my grief every day. I'm very thankful for the work I do because it helps me to process. As we're having this conversation, we're all processing, aren't we? You know, we're all gaining different perspectives from each other. We're having a wonderful energy exchange, and we're all gaining from each other. And I find that in every grief session that I do. And on a personal level, I've never stopped investigating my grief. I think grief of any type needs investigating, it needs excavating. And it can be a frightening thing to walk through those doors. But actually, if you find the right person who can help you with this toolkit and make suggestions of next steps forward, and what I find mostly is that it's tiny incremental steps over many weeks, months and years. There isn't a one-stop shop, sadly. I wish there was. I wish for every client I see, there was some magic wand that we could wave and say, you know, you're going to be your old self. And I think, you know, this is a problem for people that a lot of my clients compare themselves to how they were before. And, you know, even just things like socializing with friends become really hard. You know, are you going to go out with couples? Are you going to go out with people with children the same age as your child who died? All these things. It's a minefield out there. Or being single after divorce, and it's all couples, and suddenly all the invitation stops. And so often, you know, support can involve finding those steps. What are the things that make your heart sing? And what are the things that are still going to, but maybe it's a different version of it. And I think there's a sort of parallel between, just as there is in living and grieving well side by side, doing both in equal amounts, there is to finding new ways that weren't who you were before. They don't represent your old life. They're new and interesting things to divert your grieving and overwhelmed brain into something of interest for you that's unique to you, that doesn't represent your old life, and literally diverts your brain into something interesting that gives your brain a break from grief. And that could be volunteering, it could be going to work, it could be doing something different. I've worked with some very high-powered executives, women, who, when their partners have died, they have not been able to go back to work in the first year. And 2 of them have only wanted to wash glasses in a cafe, and they're in different parts of the country. But that's what they did for a while. They literally found the friendliest, loveliest cafe, and that was run by, you know, family run, with nice people coming in and lovely people serving and a great atmosphere. And that they've you know, been able to do that, all volunteering in some way, volunteering in a food bank, for instance, and meeting people who've probably been through a lot themselves. And often I find, you know, it's actually beer or grief cafe, you know, or other people who are divorced. Somehow even some of your oldest friends can become like aliens because they don't speak the same language that you do now. And so actually it doesn't mean you have to leave them behind, but have them there in parallel, but find these other ways. And somebody that's offering good support will be able to help you work out what those ways are. And often it's the tiniest things that can help. Yeah.
I really like that, Lizzie, because you're talking about people reconnecting with their purpose and what they want, but in rebuilding their identity, maybe in a slightly different way. And what I was wondering, as you said that, is if you see what I often see, that people often don't know what they want. And it's really difficult to ask yourself that question, particularly if often what you wanted was associated with the person who's maybe gone or passed away. Then actually going, what do I want, can be a really difficult question. Do you find that in your work as well?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And there are lots of parallels. I seem to be bringing them all up this evening. But, you know, another parallel can be that with the living and grieving, we need to find the new things, but we also need to, there's a wonderful theory called the theory of continuing bonds, which I'm sure Emma knows. And it's the theory of it's the opposite of closure. How do we connect to what has happened to us? So for instance, with grief over a bereavement, how do we connect to the person that's died and bring their memory forward into this different life now that doesn't include them physically there, but mentally they're still mapped in every layer of our brain, and there's the confusion. So how do we connect to them? And that connection can be incredibly painful at first, but as we build up the muscle memory and we make those connections and we bring them forward with us through the memories, through ritual, through celebrating their birthdays still, maybe even having a birthday cake, you know, honoring them and bringing them forward and saying their name and bringing those memories forward. So we're trying these new things, and this is the parallel. We're trying these new things to give our grieving brain a break, but we are also connecting to the person to bring them forward with us. And there's another duality to that.
I think those parallels you're talking about, Lizzie, suit your pinstriped attire.
I'm illustrating it. I'm the living embodiment of it.
And I do find that when I'm financial planning with people who are going through one of these big transitions, especially if it's grief, we do need to say, well, what would he say? If he were here, what would he say? What would his directions be? You know, so that we can honour that person in the decision making. And I'm not afraid to talk about it, and I'm not afraid if we both cry, you know, we get the tissues out. You know, it doesn't, to me, it's like, you know, bring it forward. Let's include them in the decision making, because you're not ready to make decisions without them yet. So, like, you know, what would they say? Like, obviously there's a limit because they don't have a tax bill anymore, so they could do anything. But like, you know, and the living person is still going to have tax consequences to what they do. But we can still engage, can't we, with the idea and get guidance from them. So I like that idea. I quite enjoy doing it, but not everybody wants to. That's another thing. You know, some people would rather I just put my professional face on. We don't need to do that emotional stuff, Sam. I've got, you know, I don't come here for that. Let's sort out what needs to be sorted out, and I am there to serve whatever will work for them, because I do think that one of the important things that I can bring at that time is what is it we can do. So not what is it's too hard, what is it that's too difficult, what is it that's beyond us at the moment, what can we do? So, you know, what are the small steps that we can take that do give us some progress, get some of the Sadmin out the way, and put us in a place where we're stable and safe, so as we can stay there for as long as we like before making other decisions which might be a bit harder to get our heads around. So I want to invite our audience to ask questions. They can do that in one of several ways. You can either pop them in the Q&A, so not the chat's disabled, but the Q&A, and one of us can have a look and see which ones we want to answer. But I would suggest that if it's about how we process psychologically stuff, it's Emma's bag. If it's about how we manage our emotions in transitions, it's going to be Lizzie's bag. And if it's about the financial stuff, it's going to be down to me. And I do appreciate that some people may not want to come on script, but you can actually unmute yourself, I believe, and talk to us if you would like to, if that's something you feel able and you want to do, or pop us a question in the Q&A, and we'll try and answer them. And if nobody...
Sam, sorry, just to remind you, I can't see the Q&A, so if you two don't mind fielding, that would be wonderful.
Okay. We can do that. So in the meantime, one of the kind of questions that comes up for me as a financial planner quite often is, you know, it is that whole business about what does enough look like. You know, and it's a question that happens whether you're in transition or not. In normal life, people end up arriving in a meeting with me and saying, I just don't know what enough is. I carry on working, I carry on earning, I carry on saving, I carry on investing, and I don't really know why anymore. Like, you know, can we get some kind of like boundaries around it? It seems like a never-ending problem. So it needs someone to kind of get hold of it, calculate it, and put it in a cage so that we can manage it, sort of thing. And I do find that people sometimes come to me in that state because of a transition. It's like, I've got no idea where all of this goes. I've got no idea what enough looks like, what safe looks like. I've got no idea what these things are that I've inherited, that, you know, so it's that whole kind of like feeling like it's too big and it's got no edges and I can't do this. And I guess it's just another form of overwhelm. But is it something you get asked to help with?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, what you made me think of is that when the pile seems too big, we naturally want to go away if we can't get clarity, and we have, there'll be questions arise that we don't even know we have. Some of these questions will only arise when you get put in that situation. It will something you've never thought of before. So that will feel like you have control. It will feel, again, this overwhelm, you don't know where to start. And then even the tiny things are part of that overwhelm. So they feel big. And the more we avoid them, the bigger and bigger they come in my mind. We all know that experience when you avoid something for months sometimes. It just goes to the bottom of your list. And you do it, you're like, that literally took me 5 minutes. Why has it sat on my mind in that mush of things for that long? But again, it's knowing what is within your control, knowing the answers to the questions you can get answers to, and knowing which are just unknowns and getting clarity around that and getting help and where to tackle it. So absolutely, it's something I think, you know, we do naturally. It's just a very natural human thing to do to avoid difficult things because they seem overwhelming. And so I see that. I'd say not just with money, with so many things.
Yeah. Lizzie, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I sometimes suggest to clients that where they've got, you know, they've got their to-do list, and then they've got post-its, and they've got all these things written down, and that overwhelm. And I think sometimes putting in the diary, maybe it depends, you know, what their lives are like. But for instance, if they're free in the morning a certain time, start early in the day and say at 9 o'clock, put it in the diary that you're going to do just quarter of an hour of the Sadmin. And it might be answering emails, it might be doing a bit of financial stuff, it might be making a phone call. And then I suggest to them that they set an alarm for the quarter of an hour. And when quarter of an hour is reached and they've actually done it for 15 minutes, they have permission to not do any more. And then they know that they do 15 minutes again the next day. And it works for all sorts of things. It can help with, nice. I've had clients sort of do it with clearing houses, you know, when they're trying to clear a house for sale or just clear away somebody's things. It's such a traumatic thing to do. Just do 15 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you can manage. If you're doing okay and the alarm goes at 15 minutes, carry on. It's fine. Yeah. But if you're struggling, just don't tackle it again the next day. Give yourself permission.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think a good point.
Yeah, I think that what can we do? That kind of like, instead of what can't we do, what feels too big, what could we do? What could we manage? That converting it into a manageable action, I think is hugely useful. I do it with work. I do it with if there's a big piece of work that I'm kind of like scared of like tackling and not finishing or getting wrong, you know, I'll make sure I tackle it first, and I give myself the first most sort of fresh hour I'm going to dedicate to that, and I'll do it each day until it's done. You know, it's that same sort of thing, isn't it? I used to do it with studying as well. So,
yeah, I think breaking down overwhelming things, and that was lovely advice, Lizzie, just breaking it down to make it seem manageable. And then once you start, often it'll feel easier than you thought it was. Yeah. Or if it doesn't, you just do a little bit so you can stop it after that. There are 2 questions in the quick Q&A here. I think one is probably for yourself, Sam.
Yeah, DWP.
And from
Gosh,
Ross, I read it out.
How best to deal with the DWP? They're very fast to ask for money back, yet when asking for financial support, they are incredibly slow. DWP seems to have no idea that bereaved people exist. Or are suffering. So, you know, I don't know what to tell you. If it were a regulated financial company, there's an entire complaints procedure that you can go through to bring that company to an account and have them. But when actually it's the taxpayers' money funding what is effectively an ineffective organisation, it makes it very difficult to pull levers to affect change. And the DWP, you're right, ever since COVID, they've struggled to get back up to normal operational levels, and they're overwhelmed. So I don't know that I've got an answer for how you navigate DWP. My experience is emails. That sitting on the phone can be very frustrating, takes ages to get through, and then do you really trust what they've told you? Because the quality varies enormously in terms of who answers the phone. Whereas if you stick to emails and you've got an audit trail, I think that's, I hope that the DWP take a leaf out of HMRC's book, because I don't know whether you've noticed, but I've noticed that HMRC, their website is serve yourself fantastic these days. You can type in search, type into the search engine a question and it will go through and find the data, the information that you need. And of course you can trust it because it's published on a website. and you can like take a snip of that. So I'm hoping that the DWP are quietly in their back offices doing exactly what HMRC have done, and like digitizing the estate of information so that people can access it for themselves, or at least their helpers and advisors can. So yeah, I'm sorry, I've not had better experience than you with them. And then do you want to take the other one for us, Emma?
So it says, I'll read out for Lizzie, because I think there's probably a bit of psychology and money advice here as well. It says, in your experience, what are the common things professionals can miss when supporting someone through a major life event where money has arrived? And I'm not sure, Sam or Samantha, who's asked the question, if you're meaning kind of financial experts or other experts. I don't know if you want to talk to that, Lizzie, what you see in that, or Sam from a financial side.
I think Sam probably first. From the financial, it sounds more financial, do you think?
Yeah, I think I definitely think that there is a school of financial advice which looks much more like bank managers and solicitors, lawyers, and it's much more professional and contained, and you might not feel comfortable going into one of their offices, having a meltdown and saying I can't do anything today and leaving again, you know. Whereas I think, you know, there are financial planners who are much more approachable and human, and you might want to seek them out, because a professional who's going to keep the emotions out of it and keep you at a distance is not going to be that helpful to you at a state when you can't express yourself, when your bandwidth is so limited that they say, well, tell me what you want to do with the money in 5 years' time. And you know, even if you had a magic wand and you could wave it, and everything tomorrow would be fine and perfect and exactly how you want it, you wouldn't be able to describe what that looked like. So it's not that you won't cooperate, it's that you can't do it. And they don't always understand the difference, or want to spend the time trying. So I think you need to kind of, there are quite a few sources. I know of At a Loss, Cruise Bereavements, Widowed and Young, and I'm sure you've got others that you can mention. These places signpost to professionals who have qualification and experience of working in this area. So the professionals on their databases are going to be more useful to you.
Yeah. So somebody has an understanding. Sorry, on you go, Lizzie. Sorry.
Go on.
I was going to say, it's so somebody who also has an understanding about the processes that people are going through. As you know, it's not just here's the facts. It's also the process that somebody's going through and how that might impact them, be able to respond to those facts, or also maybe act on the information they've been given. I think that's really important from my perspective. Sorry, Lizzie, I interrupted you.
Absolutely, no, it's fine. And the Good Grief Trust is a very good organisation for signposting. They've got it very clearly, you know, what type of death was it, what's the relationship, and then you go down and they've got very good signposting to a lot of different organisations. It's probably the most central signposting organisation that there is. And the Good Grief Festival is also very good. It sounds like an odd name if you haven't come across it, but it's another sort of wealth of interviews and videos on lots of different topics around grief. So going into that, and on YouTube, the Good Grief Festival has some really amazing talks that might help you gain insight. And I was just thinking, Sam, you know, when you were talking, that this is where, again, it's so helpful to have a friend or a family member go along to that meeting with you, because, you know, I know people whose adult siblings have been really useful for it. You know, they might have a brother or a sister who's particularly good at the money side, and, you know, their husband's died or their wife's died, but there's someone in the family. It could be a cousin, it could be anyone, or it could be a good friend. But you know, we have to have no shame about saying, would you open up you know, I'm opening up, I'm being vulnerable, I'm really struggling on that side. I'm terrified about going to this financial planning meeting. I think I'm just going to cut out and my brain's not going to function. Will you come and take notes for me?
Yeah.
You know, just come with me. And it's so much better than going on your own, particularly if you're grief stricken in any way. But again, it's making that move though, isn't it? It's hard to say to somebody, I need help. But actually, on the whole, when you're vulnerable, people love to be able to help. And, you know, so many people are saying, what can we do to help? And there's this difficult bridge to walk along, isn't there? Well, the bridge isn't
a really practical thing, isn't it? Come along and help me memorize or navigate this thing. There's one more question which has just come in. I don't know if and it's probably more for yourself, Lizzie. How to deal with feelings of having money that hasn't been earned when you've worked all your life and suddenly mortgage is paid off. It can feel aimless. And I think you spoke to this really nicely previously, Lizzie, when you're talking about kind of re-establishing structure, identity and purpose. And I think from my perspective, you know, often people are like, oh, you don't have to work. It seems like a really good thing. You know, so people expect you, it comes back to that shoulds. People expect you to be feeling, suddenly I'm not working anymore. It's a dream. You're living the dream. But actually, aside from the grief, losing that structure and that purpose of working towards something and achieving something can be really difficult as well. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Lizzie.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, I hear this over and over again where people have received the money and then they just feel as flat as a pancake because they have no feelings of joy, no feelings of happiness. They've got the money they always wanted in the bank, but it's got a negative connotation. And I think that is what Sam says. It's about waiting. Wait, because how you feel in 6 weeks, then 6 months, then suddenly it's 6 years and your grief is beginning to shift. I'm not putting a time frame on it. That's just an example. But, you know, I personally, I found my grief shifted a bit at year 3. I hadn't realized, because we're talking incrementally adapting to living with it and finding a more comfortable space for it. And it doesn't happen overnight with this mystical, magical wand. But suddenly you can look back. And I remember at 3 years looking back and thinking, wow, I've come a long way and I hadn't even noticed. And there was just this realization. Now, if I'd rushed into something, you know, if I was widowed, for instance, and I'd rushed into something with money in that early stage where it was negative and just thought, oh, I'm going to give it all away. You know, over those years, what would have helped the incremental steps forward with the grief and adapting to living with it would have been the things we've talked about, you know, finding purpose, finding structure. And gradually, when this new life is in place, but with nods to the old life and what you've brought forward with you, including the friends and some new ones you've made along the way through this other world you now inhabit, suddenly it might become clearer about how you want to curate your life. And but you know, if you've given it all away, it's too late.
Irreversible decisions to be avoided until you're
so
feeling.
When we say wait, we're not necessarily saying wait a year. It might be 3 or 4 years. Just keep it there safely with good financial advice so that it's making money, hopefully, but it can just sit there while you find out what you want.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. So it seems to have really rushed by. And if there are any more questions, we'll try and get back to you by email and answer them. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, really helping me understand how to be better in this space for people who are feeling and thinking differently to the way they might have been thinking last time I met them. You know, they've changed, their identity is shifting. So thank you very much for helping me understand that a bit better. And I hope it's been useful to the people who have attended. I'm guessing some of you are here because you are working with people who are going through transitions, and some of you because you're experiencing the transitions yourself. And I wish you well. So we do have a guide that we've put together. Gives you a little bit more detail about Emma and Lizzie and their work. Gives you some direction to these websites and institutions that will be able to signpost you further to resources that you might be able to access. And it helps you with a bit of a step-by-step on how you're kind of likely to experience life for a while and what you can do to support and help yourself. And we want to make sure that you go away from here knowing that there's nothing wrong with you. You're in a difficult set of circumstances. You're navigating things that you've not practiced and are new to you, and it will take time. Get yourself some help. You don't have to do it on your own. Choose that help wisely. Thank you very much, Emma and Lizzie, for your time here this evening. And I'd like to say good night.